So I will wait a minute or two for people to log on and welcome the people that are getting admitted to our session. I will give another minute here. Sometimes it takes us having lots of participants, so we're happy about that. So welcome to people who are joining. I'm just gonna give us a minute and then we'll get started. All right, I'm trying to see how we're doing. I think I'll go ahead and get started, and as people are joining us, they can also be able to hear all the things that are going on. We'll get started while our attendees are joining. So I'd like to welcome you to the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference, our annual conference. We're really excited to host it this year again. I'm Jenny Browngen. I'm one of the teaching faculty at the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work. And I am really happy that all of you are here for this particular breakout session and for our conference. Our topic today in this breakout session is bringing racial and social justice to education, social workers as union leaders and activists. This is such a critical time for all of us as social workers, and thank you for joining us for this important discussion. We're so excited. This year we have over 3,000 people registered for our conference, so obviously it's topics that people are really interested in talking about. As we start, I would like to share a visual description of myself for purposes and for people who are just listening on not having visual, that I am an older white woman with red hair, wearing glasses, with a gray sweater and blue earrings. Next, I would like to share our university's land acknowledgement. The University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work occupy ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place the nation has called Tejob since time memorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Then just a few Zoom reminders for how things operate today. This presentation is being recorded and will be available at our conference website at a later date. To access this presentation, you are required to provide your name and email. This allows us to log our attendees and email you information on CEUs for this presentation, which will be distributed via email at a later date. Your cameras and microphones will remain muted, but we have a Q&A feature where you can submit questions for our presenters. But please know that due to the large number of attendees, we may not be able to get to all questions submitted. I'm very excited to help facilitate today's session about the importance of union involvement as school social workers, and honored to have been in my school district's union president several years during Act 10 and the protests that were involved with Act 10 at that time. I'm currently still a member of several education unions, the AFT, as well as WEAC and NEA. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists today before we get started. Leland Pan is a school social worker at La Follette High School and an elected member of the board of directors for Madison Teachers Incorporated, the educator union in Madison Metropolitan School District. Madison Teachers, Inc. is affiliated with the Wisconsin Education Association Council and a member and the National Education Association. Leland is a member of the NEA Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus Previously, he was a member of the American Federation of Teachers through the Teaching Assistants Association, the AFT Local number 3220, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a Dane County Board Supervisor for District 5, where he served on the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee. He has also been a racial equity trainer and a teacher in Milwaukee. While in Milwaukee, he also co-founded Friends of Valley Park, a park volunteer group in the Pigsville neighborhood on the near north side of Milwaukee. Next is Alma Torres Pierce. She is a bilingual and bicultural middle school social worker with the Wausau School District. She previously served as a People Services Navigator in a rural school district in central Wisconsin, supporting students and families through academic, social, and systemic transitions. Alma brings a strong background in higher education with experience in student support services, academic advising, and multicultural education. She is actively involved in immigrant rights advocacy and currently volunteers with the MLK Wausau Community Event. Her work centers on equity, cultural responsive practice, and strengthening connections between schools, families, and communities. Andrew Smith is a clinical school social worker for Sheffield Lake City Schools in Ohio. He serves as the local union president for his school district's union, affiliated with OEA and NEA. Andrew is also the president-elect of the Northeastern Ohio Education Association, which supports 26,000 educator members from Northeast Ohio. Andrew worked as a science teacher before becoming a school social worker, and in his role now as a clinical school social worker, his specialties include school social work, multi-systems involved families, and he oversees community-based wraparound support services. And then we have Maggie Smith. She's a school social worker at Leopold Elementary School in Madison Metropolitan School District. She has been a school social worker for 8 years, starting her career in the Wauwatosa School District. She is a faculty representative for her union, Madison Teachers Incorporated, and serves on the Diversity and Equity Committee. Madison Teachers Incorporated is affiliated with Wisconsin Education Association Council and the National Education Association. And Maggie is a member of NEA's Black Caucus. So a little bit of information about people. And so now let's get started with our topic and our panelist discussion. We're going to handle this by having several questions that I will address to all of the panelists, and then we'll have some questions that are specifically for each individual. We will also try to have time at the end to have questions, and so be sure to put those in the Q&A. And again, we'll do our best to get to them as we can. So for the first question, we're going to start with Maggie, and I'll start the question. And remember for the panelists that the first time you speak, to give just a brief description of what you look like, as people that are either listening or not able to see it. Each of you is bringing a unique perspective to our discussion. What suggestions do you have to other school social workers about why they should be a member and active participant in the union? What are some specific ways to be more involved? Maggie, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Maggie Smith. I am a 32-year-old Black biracial woman. I am currently who uses she, her pronouns. I'm currently wearing a dark brown sweater with white stripes on it, and I have brown curly hair that I'm wearing on top of my head in a ponytail. I'm wearing gold hoop earrings, and I have a gold nose piercing as well. Thank you, Jenny. So my kind of some background of why I got involved in my union. I am a third generation union member on both sides of my family. My parents and my grandparents were all active union members. And so before I even knew the complete scope of what a union was, I knew it was important to join my union. I was always told with the messaging, if you are part of a workplace that provides union membership, that you should be a part of that union, because unions provide protections for our labor, and our labor is very valuable, and that you deserve that. And as I've gotten more active in my union, So I joined right away 8 years ago when I started at the Wauwatosa School District outside of Milwaukee. Um, and as I became more involved in my union, I realized that unions are you. You make your union. So unions are bigger than just providing those important workplace protections. But there are also, if you have an idea or if you want to address an issue, a union is a great place and vehicle to do that. And social workers in particular bring a very unique perspective to education and unions in general through our code of ethics. You know, we have principles of service that task us with sharing our knowledge and expertise in order to address social issues. And so, again, a union is a vehicle in being an active participant to bring those values to life. And as school social workers, too, we're often the only social workers in our buildings, or sometimes if you're in a smaller school district, you might be the only school social worker. So again, we have this unique perspective that's important for us to share because we can bring up issues and issues that might not have been brought up before because there aren't as many social workers as there are teachers, for example. And I know, especially during 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement was very active and at the forefront, I heard from a lot of social workers that they were very dissatisfied with the NASW and kind of the lack of action that they were bringing to the moment. And in those discussions, I often heard people kind of trying to try to figure out ways that they could get involved in addressing these issues. And a lot of social workers were like, "Oh, well, how about a union? We should have a union." So in that moment, I felt very lucky to be a part of public education because we do have a union that we could join. And I'm glad that social workers were seeing that this was, and they were providing these opportunities, and they also wanted to be a part of unions. And so specific ways that you can get involved in your union, there are a lot of committees in unions. I'm on the Diversity and Equity Committee. There's Handbook Committee, Voters Committee. You can be a building representative to represent your colleagues in your specific workplace. And also, for some smaller unions that might not have as many opportunities for members, as a member of your local, you're also a member of your state and your national union. And often they provide different opportunities to get involved as well, to help inform policy. You can be a part of different caucuses, like I'm a part of the Black Educator Caucus. So again, I think it's just important for us to be active members so we can bring that very unique perspective that we have as social workers.
Thanks. Andrew, why don't you go next with this question?
All right, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Smith. I'm a school social worker here in Ohio. I am a 48-year-old male. I am bald. I am wearing a blue blazer with a blue shirt. I am excited to be here for today's training. I have a little bit, different perspective. I was a science teacher prior to being a school social worker. And so I've been a classroom teacher. And, just as Maggie had said, I'm a second generation union member and in educator union. And I think involvement, like this is about like check and balance to the system, right? In order to how do we advocate? These are the things that we do as social workers, whether we are representing students to make sure that students who may haven't gotten a fair shake, or to be able to advocate for workers' rights. We know that all of our members in our union come with their own story, and you know, when teachers or educators come to work, they may struggle with things that they are going on at home, or if their own mental health issues. And so we really, school social workers as union leaders, really put you in a position to use a variety of skills, right? Whether we are advocating for our profession, advocating for students, advocating for the other members of our, in our buildings. So advocacy and being able to represent both students or staff, kind of the foundation of what school social workers' rights, in terms of bargaining, mediation, in negotiations, things like that. But really, I think what school social workers do best is that they really can practice and use those active listening skills, right? Often there will be people who will approach whether they have a concern or they have a question, and really kind of allowing them to kind of tease out or flush out, like, what are the issues that they're struggling with in their classroom or on their school bus or in the cafeteria while they're monitoring students, right? To be able to see from their perspective. I think that unions really create that ability for check and balance, with your management and administrative, kind of the executive branch or executive side of your school district, as well as the governance side. These are the elected school officials. Like, we really, each entity, I often refer to it as kind of like the three-legged stool. Like, these systems are in balance, okay, or we want to achieve to have them in balance. Therefore, we can have a strong, robust public education system. And at the end of the day, our role as union leaders is to advocate to have a high quality public education system that is accessible to all. And no matter what your zip code is, that we want you to have access to high quality education. At the end of the day, I believe that is our focal point in terms of advocacy.
Thank you. Leland, let's have you go next.
That's good. Thanks for having me here. My name's Leland Pan. I'm a Asian American male in my 30s with short black hair and glasses, and I'm wearing my red union hoodie, repping my union Madison Teachers Inc. So I think something to emphasize that both Maggie and Andrew brought up is just, again, emphasizing that we can't fulfill our duty as social workers to advocate for social justice without workplace rights and protections, right? If you're not in a union workplace, you're an at-will employee. You can be fired for any reason. And sure, legally, there are reasons, there are allegedly protections for you to not be discriminated against, to not be, pushed out for your viewpoints or for your advocacy. But when you're at will, there's no way to challenge administration for doing it in other reasons. For example, you're a thorn in your district's side in a non-union school, and instead of pushing you out for that, they'll just say, well, you were a minute late to work 3 times in a row, see you. So so first of all, just at the forefront, even if it's a pretty it feels weird sometimes in our profession to advocate for ourselves, because we're a role that is very much an advocate for others. But it's important to recognize that we can't do our jobs if we're not advocating for our rights, right? And then I think Andrew and Maggie did a good job of talking about, I think, ways to officially be involved, right? Many unions have infrastructure to connect with other people, to build those relationships that are the core of organizing for better conditions, that are committee work and infrastructure work that help keep your union strong. But also, at the end of the day, a union, as Maggie said, it's a democratic institution. If you're in a union that maybe only does the bare minimum around legal supports and hasn't taken on issues or hasn't advocated on these macro things that we as social workers have a unique lens on, right? We can get the ball rolling. This provides you the infrastructure and space to have these conversations and find like-minded people. For example, Madison Teachers Inc. Uh, they had a hard time during COVID recruiting in MMSD student services staff, social workers, nurses, counselors, psychs, and made a change to hire these staff at a different level on the pay scale, right, at a higher level to try to increase how enticing it is to work for MMSD. They did not bump up any veterans to match that pay scale, right? And as an aside, advocating for a pay scale is one of the ways in which we as social workers can benefit from a union workplace, right? I've worked in a non-union school, and we discovered in a school that everyone individually negotiated their salary. We had people pool their information together, and we discovered that the white males employed at that school, Carmen schools in Milwaukee, were paid on average higher, and that staff of color were paid the worst on average in that school, right? Which reflects years of research on HR practices, right? Anytime negotiations about salary is not transparent and is done by individual negotiation, white males tend to feel most confident in advocating for their own salaries to be higher, right? So first of all, a union prevents racial and gender bias in terms of pay. So then to hire people in our district and bump everyone new up without bumping the veterans up, you kind of take away some of that fairness. So and the nurses were entirely left out, which I think was a travesty because, during COVID, it's not like we didn't have a nurse shortage either. Our nurses went to union leadership, and union leadership was overwhelmed. It was a crisis, and I think many nurses were frustrated at the lack of movement. So when the rest of student services got on board and were advocating that we pay veterans at the new pay scale level and adjust their pay to match, we made sure to include nurses in that. It's like, and you left nurses out entirely. Nurses should get the bump that everyone else got, right? And so this effort wasn't done directly through committees, though obviously our handbook negotiation committee was very supportive. Our union leadership was very supportive, but this was done through grassroots efforts to go to the school board, to disrupt their meetings, to have one-on-one conversations with administrative leadership. And again, to tell nurses who were fed up that not enough was done when they first brought up the issue, it was like, hey, you've got numbers now, we got your back, right? And so a union provides that sort of collective power, right? Without a union, it would have been much harder for us to find each other's contact info, to find time to meet, to these basic building blocks, the boring stuff behind the visible organizing, right? So that really highlights the importance of a union to our role, and also highlights maybe a little bit about our unique approach, which I think as social workers we're much more likely than the average person to see the macro issue and to see the ways in we are systemically and collectively oppressed, and to advocate for solutions that bring people together instead of pitting people against each other.
Thank you. And Alma, and with your perspective on things, what would be for answering for this question?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alma Torres Pierce, and I use she, her, ella pronouns. I am a 41-year-old Latina with dark long hair and glasses. I'm currently wearing a heart-stamped sweatshirt only because I am freezing, as I'm sure we all are. And so I wanted to share a little bit about my district. I am currently located in central Wisconsin. My district roughly has around 7,800 students. Around 50% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunches. 38% of the population of students and families identify as non-white. Around 9% of our student population are English language learners. And so with that, I just want to go off by the title of a presentation, which is Bringing Racial Justice to Education. With that title, we are guaranteed to ruffle at least a few feathers. And so knowing that there is someone with you, in this case, a union to support you, guide you, should you have any conversations with admin due to potential disgruntled colleagues and our coworkers who might have been offended from a presentation that you previously gave in which you are highlighting any data, it definitely gives you a peace of mind. So I come from a culture of story sharing, so I will share a story with you that happened to me. This is a personal experience that occurred at a previous district in which I did not participate in a union. This was mainly because I did not know that I could. No one asked me to be part of the union, and so I thought that this union was only for teachers. In this district, I would have family members of the students that would come and see me after they would have a conversation with administration. Usually this was after an incident and where the student required disciplinary actions. Parents came because they really did not understand what was said to them. And I don't just mean that in terms of language, I mean it across the board, all sorts of barriers in terms of the conversations that they would have with these families. And so the parents did not know what the next steps were, what had transpired with the student in the first place. And so the conversation that I would have with the family centered around an understanding of what had happened, where they needed to go, and step-by-step instructions in order for the student to rejoin with peers at their school. I would go off by the documentation that the family provided, as I was not part of the initial conversations with the family and administration in this case. I soon became aware that this was an issue with administration, as they felt that I was undermining their authority, which was not at all the case. I would like to highlight Standard 11 and Standard 12 from the National Association of Social Workers Practice Standards. For school social workers, number 11 is interdisciplinary leadership collaboration. Number 12 is advocacy. Had I been part of the union, I would have asked a representative to come with me to many uncomfortable meetings that I unfortunately had that were mainly based on assumptions. I would have had my anxiety reduced quite a bit by their presence, as well as any defensiveness that I might have felt. In terms of specific ways to be involved, I would say that the simplest and easiest way is to become a member. Meeting with your building representative, asking questions, attending their monthly meetings, and ultimately becoming elected for leadership roles. I do want to say this is my first year in a union, and so I'm still learning, but it's very nice to know that that I have someone to go to when I have questions or any concerns. Thank you.
Well, thank you for everyone. I think we're starting to hear some different perspectives as well as some common themes, which is very important to hear. And the power of the collective group is a huge one that is overriding everything. Our second question is that as we look at overall racial and social justice issues and advocacy needed in schools, how can unions lead in the needed efforts? What are some specific racial and social justice issues you have addressed through your union? And Leland, for this question, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so, there are the possibilities are infinite, right? And I want to start by saying that unions are not and have not historically inherently been like racial justice organizations, right? I think there may be people on this who have had negative experiences with unions, and some of the rhetoric I think is rooted is in bad faith, and some of the rhetoric is rooted in reality, right? Like I think about Milwaukee Public Schools history and the fight for integration in Milwaukee Public Schools. And I think that the Milwaukee Teachers Union in the 70s made some critical mistakes that to protect what they viewed as their teachers, but were really white teacher interests in ways that were at the expense of students of color, right? And I think that Milwaukee's school landscape is still reeling from those kinds of critical mistakes. So it's important to recognize that unions are potential tools for racial justice, but only if we leverage them correctly, right? So we have to, they're democratic institutions. If the democratic will of its membership is not advocating towards this goal, right, we need to change that. So I think we all play a role. If you're not satisfied with your union, if you feel like your union's leadership does not take these things into consideration, we have to get involved in these organizations, right? Again, and it's important not to also write off a union because the current leadership, say, is not on board, right? Precisely because it's a democratic institution, right? So on my end, I think even fighting for a union in a non-union school has produced results when it comes to racial justice. For example, at Carmen, we had a union drive that we lost, but in the process of that, we found that my building principal was really putting this pressure on two staff of color, two women of color, specifically, and that this principal seemed to have a particular difficulty with women of color stood up to him, shall we say. And through working with a union on a union election, we even filed a formal unfair labor practice with the NLRB, the National Labor Review Board, and won, right? So, and put that administrator on notice and changed his behavior. So even the act of organizing can help protect staff of color. Unions, again, provide that the infrastructure to collaborate with community groups, right? It's one thing if you're at a non-union site and you go one-on-one with a grassroots organization fighting for racial justice. It's a different thing when, as an organization representing like hundreds or thousands of members, you go and collaborate, right? Imagine imagine a world where there are federal agents coming to school dismissal sites and trying to kidnap students and tear gas kids and attacking staff members who are protecting their students. Imagine that world, if you may. Right, where a union provides you the ability to collaborate with some of these grassroots organizations. I think the Minnesota Federation of Educators has been, Minneapolis Federation of Educators has been a huge part of organizing protections for students in organizing efforts to resist this kind of overreach. I think something to keep in mind is focus on the campaigns of your community. What is specific to your community? There's no official roadmap on how your union advocates for racial justice. If your community's specific issue is immigrant rights, right? Like, what are ways your union can connect with the infrastructure that's already there? If your community specific issue is school privatization, right? What are ways that you can leverage your connections? I think unions provide so much. For example, to provide another example, last year, May Day, in Wisconsin, historically, Milwaukee has a very strong May Day action to protest for workers' rights and immigrant rights. Students walk out, communities walk out, businesses shut down. And Madison, because of the limitations to Voces de la Frontera's infrastructure, often has an action May 2nd. This particular year, May 2nd was a staff-only day. And again, it just doesn't resonate as a day of actions on a separate day. So our students independently wanted to organize a May Day walkout, right? And our union provided some infrastructure in terms of meeting spaces, in terms of food for students to have this planning. Staff members joined in collaborating. We were marshals to protect our students, right? Our union had funding, had connections in ways that could help protect our students who organize. Compare that to right now, Augustin Prep in Milwaukee, a private school founded by a Republican-leaning business person, is threatening consequences for their students who want to walk out, right? At the same time that Milwaukee public schools are walking out every day against ICE, right? And so at a private school like Augustin too, even if students wanted to risk that, staff have very little power to support their students because their administration has all the power to crack down on staff. So there have been some advocates for non-union private and charter schools who have leaned on history like the 1970s with the Milwaukee Teachers Union to say, hey, unions have protected bad teachers, have protected racist interests before, and we need a school run by people of color, like free of those bureaucracies. And it's like, in reality, what happens at non-union schools is that staff and students do not have the protection to speak their minds. If you are in a union that you feel isn't doing enough, just remember that it's a democratic organization and you have the power to change it.
Thank you. Some great examples. Appreciate that. Alma, what would you like to add to this question?
Absolutely. So at the outset, unions through collective bargaining can help shape the language of contracts, ensuring culturally responsive teaching and anti-racist professional development, but also following through ensuring that the district is including this type of professional development, whether that's in service or throughout professional development days, which I think we have 9 in my district. This is important as there are some staff who you may all know have been in the role for 20 or plus years. And there's also new staff that might benefit from this information that might not have had the opportunity to learn. And so it's important to learn how damaging unintended bias comments, how can they affect the students. These individuals might not be aware of new data or tools that they can use to essentially better themselves and being able to serve the students that they serve in a much more positive manner. So this type of professional development is something that I have spoken to my union representative about. Most districts in this area, anti-racist professional development is substandard if present, yet 60% of student population in the first school district was population of color and almost 40% in the current district that I'm at. I've offered presentations to my building. I've advocated for community groups to come and speak to our entire district. I do want to add that I'm only one person and I do need the support of the union. I need the support of my coworkers and I need the support of my colleagues. It's important to note here too that this is heavy work within itself, but as a person of color, it carries an additional emotional and psychological weight. There is often an unspoken expectation that as people of color, we are supposed to educate, translate, advocate, and absorb resistance while still carrying a full professional workload. Without the union, without institutional backing, this labor just becomes too heavy. We're unable to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, some really important points for sure, and expectations, extra expectations. Andrew, what would you like to add to this question?
I think that Maggie said it in her part of her last response is that, you are the union, right? We hear that slogan, you are the union. And I believe it to be accurate, right? Often as a local president, and our local has 125 members. It's the size of our certified staff here in our school district. People, I've heard before, like, what is the union going to do about this? What's the union going to do about this? And my response is, I don't know. What are we going to do about this, right? What is going to be our position? What kind of things are we going to, what action are we going to take, or what strategy are we going to use? And unionization is really about making sure that there's a process, right? In terms of people say, oh, unions protect bad teachers, unions protect bad employees, when in fact, my role as a local leader is to make sure that our negotiated agreement, and it is the rule book that is negotiated by both management and labor, right? To make sure that that is followed, that people get process protection, that if there is an issue, they have a right to be heard. They have a right to have an appeal process, to be able to speak their mind, to be able to advocate. I'll often hear that, from people who are misinformed about continuing contract or tenure rights of staff members, specifically here in Ohio, that protections such as continuing contract and tenure allow educators to be able to stand up to fight for their students, for when students are being unjustly disciplined or are being targeted, for us to stand up and to be able to advocate and to support our students. It also allows us as a union leader in order to help our members, educators who are coming to school with mental health issues that need to take a leave that is prescribed in the contract, to be able to navigate that process. That way they can take care of their own mental wellness in order to come back and be the best educator they can. We want all of our members, and a lot of this, we may talk a little bit about this later, but that what I call the post-Janus era in 2018, when unions are voluntary membership organizations, is our role in order to make sure, like, why would the school social worker want to be a member of the union? Why would the school counselor or speech language pathologist or school nurse, like what's in it for them? Right? We've got to be able to look at what supports and things that we can guarantee that master agreement, whether it provides a contractually protected duty-free lunch, and when that is scheduled, and those things are up for discussion, or if it's contractually protected planning time. Many of the things that occurred prior to the Janus decision in 2018, we are bargaining for the masses, right? And so in a school district, a large majority are teachers, whether they're classroom teachers or special education or vocational teachers, right? And so from a classroom mindset, when in fact you'll open a lot of contracts and see that there's very little protections for student services workers, whether it's ETR, an IEP, special education caseload limits, or protections of time. People value time in order to make sure that they can implement quality programming. These are the things that we do, both not with just students, but also with staff. And we've also, professional development often in schools are for the masses, right? And we have worked locally in order to guarantee and to put into our master agreement that student services personnel, including our what we call our applied academics, your elementary music, your elementary tech, your middle school band, your physical education, that they get access to professional development that meets their needs. Many times, many of our members will attend a professional development seminar or session where it may not pertain to them because it could be classroom teacher oriented. And so we have worked to build that. We've done that as an organization in order to have value, to show, to be able to, we are listening to our members. We're having one-on-one conversations about what is value. Much of the work that we are doing as union leaders in Ohio is very grassroots driven, right? We need to rally the members of our organization in, your community member. Research has supported that they value their local teachers. They value their local school employee, right? We want to empower. We want to be the experts. We are the experts. We want, when people are asking for opinions or questions or they're looking for insight, listen, we want them to look to their local public school. And we often found that begins to build capacity, whether it's through partnerships and coalitions and task force that Leland was talking about, or at a large, maybe a legislative or advocacy, approach. We want to mobilize, whether it's at a local, regional, or statewide organization. We are working in Ohio. We have a lot of uphill challenges that we have legislatively. The attack on public education is at an all-time high, in my opinion. We are looking to mobilize our 120,000 Ohio education members in order to build capacity, right, and to make change. These are things we are working on, and these are all classic social work issues.
Great, thanks. A lot of stuff that we need to keep thinking about, and how we can, the protection piece of it, as well as all of the areas we're able to see and do as social workers. Maggie, what would you like to add to this question?
Yes, I think the other panelists did a great job covering the fact that, our teacher unions, educator unions, it's a collective of educators. And as educators, we are at the forefront of these social and racial issues. We're seeing firsthand how these issues impact our students and our communities, and depending on the identities that we hold as individuals, how they impact ourselves. And as social workers, we have that duty to challenge the social injustice and dealing with these issues at the forefront. These aren't abstract. They aren't abstract ideas or things. They're very real for us. As Alma had said, that is very heavy for us to carry. But there is, especially in moments like right now, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of intense emotions. People feel the need to want to do something. And I think the powers that be want to keep us hopeless, want to keep us thinking that we can't do things to change it. So having a collective, having a union helps keep that hope alive. It helps us keep that hope at the forefront. Even if we're scared and we're angry, there is a way to channel that to bring the change that we want to see. And that is how we will win. Because, yeah, it can be overwhelming to think about these issues. They're huge, they're systemic. We can't do it by ourselves. And so having people who have like or have common values, and there is that infrastructure within that union to be able to address these issues. I like the saying of you don't have to do everything, but you have to do something in these moments of injustice. And just knowing that you don't have to take it on alone can keep that momentum going. And it brings sustainable and lasting change. When I started in Wauwatosa, a smaller suburban school district outside of Milwaukee in 2018, I remember meeting with Black families and them being very dissatisfied with the lack of representation of the Black community within the schools. At the elementary level, there wasn't like an acknowledgement or celebration of Black History Month. And so I really wanted to dig more into that during my first year. And, it wasn't something the school district itself was really pushing for. And even within my local union, there wasn't too much conversation around that issue. But I started to learn more about Black Lives Matter in Schools Week. And the reason I was able to learn about this was because of the Milwaukee Teachers Union and MPS, and also the Madison Teachers Incorporated. They were hosting trainings and they were providing resources and toolkits. So even though my local didn't have it at that time, there were still other unions that were providing this very necessary professional development and tools and trainings and resources that were really important to have. So I was able to bring those into my building and to try to build a structure of how we addressed the issues that our families were bringing up to us. So again, yeah, just having that collective power is really important in these moments.
Well, I think that's a real important point to also think about as when there's been social change and social issues that the community or the group of people are supporting the change in. It's sort of like the old phrase back in the 60s of like power to the people. The collective people, that's like the collective union, also is the support. And you're not doing it alone. You're not targeted. And if you're targeted, you have other people helping you through the process. And I think also Maggie brought up the point too, and the idea that the union it goes beyond necessarily your own district. Some of you might be, that are on this call on the Zoom session in a district that doesn't have a union. And Leland, I know you gave examples of what you can do if you're not having a union, or reaching out to the broader group of the state organization and NEA and the information that they have and trainings that they have. And I think that broader level is another way. We have a couple questions that people have put in there, as well as questions we wanted to ask here. I guess if we will get to these individual questions, but one that had just popped up, Maggie, with what you were just been talking about if you could speak on what you recall of the parents' ability to uplift morale in their unions. Ideas, did parents at all get involved with issues going on when, as you talked about parents feeling upset of how things were handled? Is that anything that you have any information about?
Yeah, Yeah. So when I joined and I was going to speak to this in my next question, but Wauwatosa, when I joined in 2018, didn't have very big membership. In my building in particular, I was one of two union members in my particular building. So membership was very low. And so my focus was really trying to understand why the membership was low, and also how to get more people to get involved in the union. And so I definitely think because we didn't have a strong union presence, it was hard to collaborate with communities and families, because we didn't have the people or the numbers to really organize our efforts. Um, and so it felt very like some of the work that we were doing, it felt very siloed. Like the families were bringing up concerns to me, and then I was kind of bringing it into the building. But I think if I was there longer, and just really recognizing that, and how did we trying to think of ways of how to make that a more sustainable change district-wide and union-wide, and how to connect the union with families. Because sometimes it feels like it's families versus educators and workers. So I really would be interested in how to bridge that gap between the two, to show that we have common interest. How do we build power together instead of against each other?
Well, thanks. And I think then I'll get to Alma's question because I know it kind of leads in that as well. And we have several other good questions that I know for the panelists that will in looking at ways that we can get organized and particularly if you're in a workplace without contracts right now. But let's start with this particular question, Alma, about when school social workers identify patterns of harm toward refugee and newcomer students and their families and work to bring in community agencies to educate staff, what role can unions play in supporting this type of work? And how can they help shift school culture toward greater accountability with racial justice?
Yes, so I do want to say my building has roughly around 700 students. From all staff, there's only 5 staff of color. And so part of the reason that I think I have identified some of these issues is because students feel comfortable coming to me. I'm also aware of their situations, if you will. I ask those questions, right? And so I would say that a way in which unions can assist would be to not just hire, but actually put an effort, a strong effort into hiring professionals of color, but also supporting them. We often see that once staff of color are hired, they're kind of just on their own and they have additional expectations on them. And so that would be number one. Number two, I would say continuing those conversations. I have noticed as well that unions might feel uncomfortable providing a little bit more information that might feel the rest of the educators uncomfortable with those kinds of topics, which are very necessary topics. And so prioritizing those types of conversations, prioritizing that type of professional development, I would say that would be one of the most important things. And also using that proactive education. I feel a lot of the times schools have more of a reactionary approach instead of proactively having those types of conversations. And while I understand that you cannot have all the conversations about all the potential harm, I do feel that racial harm has not been eradicated, although people might feel that it has not, whether that comes from staff, peers, policies, or systems. And I think that ultimately unions have the power to normalize racial justice as essential and having ongoing work rather than optional or crisis-driven initiatives.
Thanks. Um,
I, I'd
mhm,
also add, Jenny, is that,
absolutely.
agreeing, with Alma is that, as a statewide educator union, we have resolutions, and these are our conviction statements that are our belief, like in what we should be advocating and what we should be embracing, and the things that we should be doing in terms of activism, right? And these are things that are approved by our members, right, from our representative assembly. These are the things. So when we talk about supporting newcomers or refugees and things like in terms of immigration, these are already a part of our resolutions. So every union in your state, right, that is under the umbrella of the organization, whether it's Wisconsin or Ohio or Pennsylvania, like we work to continue to move the needle, right, to make change and things like that. And I can often say that lots of times local presidents are in a certain classification, such as that they are a classroom teacher, or if you work in a classified union, like your leader could be a bus driver, right? And what we should be doing is we want to be active listeners, right? Because we, like, many times we want to do what we do best. We should be educating. We should, if you are not active in your union, you should be advocating for the populations, right? You should be help educating people about what things you are seeing in the field on how to kind of create these coalitions or alliances, right? So some of these beliefs, they already exist. It's just each local, we need to educate the local leadership about action that we think we should be taking.
Well, and adding on to that, Andrew, if you could also now address, are there ways in which school social workers can be involved in the union should they wish to take a more advocacy role at a legislative or collaborative level rather than just at the local elected, which also gets a little bit into one of the questions looking at how can we really address the common good when workplace individual one might not have a particular contract.
Right, sure. And I was thinking about some of that. And I saw that answer in the question and answer. And I want to try to, how can I make this concise? Because we could probably talk for a half hour about this. What we're doing to try to mobilize our local union, and it's really, I think, about finding everybody's expertise, right? Not everybody wants to be a local president. Not everybody wants to be involved in contract enforcement. But in terms of school social workers, like I think Maggie and Leland may have talked about prior, is that there's so many opportunities, right? The union is a vehicle, right? Is a vehicle for change. And whether you are at a committee level or that you are at a legislative kind of advocacy level, we screen state House of Representatives and state senators for endorsement to have an opportunity to participate in that process, where every local has a say in how the screenings are operated and making sure that their voice is heard. We know in public education, every decision is a political decision. We know what is coming out of the state capitol, right? Many of these things are made. These laws are created by people who have no idea what is going on in public education and public schools today, right? We have got to be able to communicate with our elected officials, especially when you are a constituent. We often have, like I often have conversations with our state representative, our state senator, in order to advocate, like what could be the impact of a law that is being considered? What kind of ramifications could it have at a local level? So kind of a legislative or collaborative approach. So I would say to folks who are saying, hey, like I want to be involved in my union, right? I want to be involved, but I'm not sure if I want to be the person defending or be able kind of doing that contract enforcement or progressive policy kind of thing. We want people to be say, hey, I want to go maybe to the next level, whether it's making kind of these committee work or be able to advocate or participate in trainings. Regional and state unions really offer a wide variety of training that is really specific to these issues that we're dealing with.
Well, thank you. I think again, looking at that, the global, the local and the state and the national and the level and community focus. And um, Maggie, you talked a little bit about when you were at Wauwatosa, and it also ties in with one of the questions that have been put into for us to think about how looking at the concerns and needs of the community, that sometimes that's the organizing that certainly is done by the Chicago Teacher Union, and the idea of really focusing on that as you look at like in Wauwatosa, that it would be like many of the suburban communities have become a little more conscious of issues of racial inequalities in recent years. But what are ways a stronger movement could help with communities that maybe there might be more pushback from the local politicians, as Andrew was talking about, that the politics that are there, and how can we do that, and ways of organizing using particular organizational models?
Yeah, so like I mentioned previously, I had joined the Wauwatosa School District in 2018. And Wauwatosa is a suburb of Milwaukee, right next to Milwaukee. It's predominantly white. It's socioeconomically middle to upper middle class. So it was a very interesting time for me to join the school district. When I first kind of was, like I had mentioned in my previous answer, of like addressing concerns that some of our Black families had with lack of representation within the school, and exploring that Black Lives Matters in schools curriculum and some guidelines. When I was bringing it up to district people, I was kind of shut down. I was told that at that time, the community wasn't ready to take on these issues or address these issues, which I found very interesting because, I mean, they didn't have any evidence to support that claim. And also, I mean, these are issues that have existed forever. So um, to say you're not ready, when it should be the mindset of how do we get ready to address these issues. Um, and then uh, and then when in 2019 is when I became a building representative. So that was my second year as a school social worker. It's my first time being a building rep for my union. And so I was really learning as I was going. I didn't know all the ins and outs of how to be a building representative. Um, Again, knew that being a part of a union was important, but didn't know all the ins and outs. And that's how I was learning that, like, I am my union, and if there are certain things that I want to change or want to see, that I could, being an active member is a way to address some of these issues. And like I said, we didn't have a lot of people in the union in my building. I was one of two, and I think I was able to sign on a couple other members at the time. So we didn't have big numbers. And then 2020 happened, and the pandemic, and we went into lockdown. And not only were we dealing with the pandemic, but also the murder of George Floyd happened, and there were countless examples of police brutality and police murder that we were seeing. And again, because we were stuck at home, a lot of the Wauwatosa community, they could not escape this. Like they were really seeing this firsthand for the first time. And in Tosa in particular, they had a police officer at that time who had murdered 3 people between 2015 and 2020. So again, it was right in their own backyards. They were dealing with this. And just kind of like what we're seeing right now, back in 2020, the community, Wauwatosa, they were angry. They were scared. They wanted to do something. So a lot of different organizations and groups kind of were popping up. There was like a Tosa Moms group to address racial injustice issues. Because again, this was they were really coming into this racial consciousness, which was, it was good to see that energy. But our district was then kind of scrambling because, again, when I was bringing this issue up in 2018, they weren't really wanting to touch it, but because they couldn't ignore in 2020, they were like, how do we talk to our kids about these issues and how do we address these issues? And they didn't have the resources, or they were scrambling and putting together things very messily in order to address these issues. So I think if our union was stronger, we would have the ability to organize. Because just because you have a bunch of people in something doesn't mean that you're organized, but you do need people to organize. And I think my hope, if I was there at the time, like being able to get more members and also to mobilize them to collaborate with the outside groups that we're seeing that we're forming. Like we could have come together, done some actions. I mean, we had our own resolution that we put for our union, but everything was kind of being done in silos. A lot of the same work was being done. And so it kind of weakened the momentum and weakened our ability to address the issues. Also at the time, I was a part of a staff of color affinity space within the district. It was not part of the union, it was different. But again, there wasn't too much of a bridge between the union and that group, even though there were a lot of shared values, a lot of the same things. So I think with a stronger labor movement, we would have been able to integrate all that together. And TOSA, we went back to school in person pretty quickly. And the fall of 2020 is when we went back into the school buildings. Even though our union took the stance that we did not think it was safe for ourselves, for our students, for their families. We didn't have the infrastructure. We did not have the resources to properly address this. And also the staff of color affinity space I was in also took the stance of not wanting to go back in person full time because we saw firsthand how COVID had devastated and continued to devastate communities of color. And so, but then we had some families and some the white middle class families that did not see COVID as like a racial or social justice issue. So even the certain groups that formed in response to police brutality, they didn't see COVID as a racial justice issue, and they kind of pushed to go in person. So again, I think with a stronger labor movement, being able to kind of divide and conquer, use our skills to collaborate with the people who shared the same values and wanted the same things, and also kind of dive into conversations with families that maybe didn't share those same values and didn't want those same things, in order to, like, how do we address this issue together, instead of it being like, we're the union here, this is a group over here, this is a group over here. Like, I think a stronger labor movement would have brought it all together.
Thank you. And I know I want to make sure that to get to this particular, circle back to this question and ask Leland, and then have some time for some closing comments from each of you, or in any of the particular questions that you see that you that speak to you to answer. But I guess the idea, Leland, we're looking at in particular today of why school social workers should step into these roles besides our code of ethics. And that so school social workers have unique training that can make them especially skilled for union work. And how have you responded to student services and social work staff who are dismissive of union involvement due to factors like feeling excluded by the focus on the teachers, historically regressive stances, which I know that you have talked about before? And how do you leverage your social work skills in your profession's unique strengths. And then we'll have a chance for others to also kind of address this idea of why as social workers, that would be the case.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels to a union organizing or any type of organizing conversation and what we do as social workers, right? So I think about it like, say, a typical conversation I might have with a high school student is, who may, let's say, struggle with emotional regulation and did something in class or did something in school that was maybe unsafe, something like that. Our conversation delves in, tries to get to maybe the root of the issue, right? And oftentimes you get to the issue, the why the student's emotionally dysregulated. There's a totally justifiable, understandable reason, whether that's a specific incident, whether that's like historical trauma, and lack of whether that's need, if the student is hangry, right? So, and the conversation then after identifying the root cause redirects towards, well, what actions would really address your interest, your need, that like affirming that, I get why you're dysregulated. Like you're not a bad person for being dysregulated, but like what, how do we actually address that need in a way that benefits you and also doesn't put other people in harm's way, right? So I have that conversation with high school students all the time. And then similarly, as a union representative, like I'm having conversations with teachers that I think have some similarities, right? So teachers are emotionally dysregulated because their work is super hard and they're overwhelmed and student behavior is really burning them out, right? And it can be very easy then for the teacher to say some things or do some things that put the blame on students, right? And then recognizing, so as a union rep, I'm not there to be like, you're a bad person for like, blaming the students or something like that. Like it's a frustrating job. I'm fortunate to have also been a classroom teacher, so I know intimately why that can be frustrating, but then redirecting that again, right? The real root cause here is that your working conditions suck, that you're not given the supports you need. And that's not the student's fault. That's, our system's fault. And redirecting, don't blame students. How do we address these systemic factors? Is our district respecting your prep period? Are kids' needs being met, right? Will your kids' behaviors go down if we meet your student needs? I think this goes to the question that Jenny, that you had brought up to Maggie about sort of like the social justice organizing model, right? Recognizing that as as a union, if we're fighting for the causes that benefit the community, that benefits our working conditions, right? Chicago Teachers Union was brought up as a union that has effectively leveraged this model, right? Chicago's teacher union has advocated for more affordable housing, right? Of course, if our families have stable housing, we will see first, it would benefit our students, obviously. It would benefit their ability to engage in school. But it would also benefit our working conditions, right? Like students will be less dysregulated. Students will be able to pay attention more, be less disruptive in class because they have their needs met, right? So absolutely. Like we have to recognize that fighting for these community causes benefits our working conditions. Madison Teachers Inc. has taken a stance fighting for universal free meals. We're a district that is majority qualifies for universal free meals, but doesn't have it. And the argument is cost, right? But not only would it benefit everyone to have access to universal free meals and improve things like student behavior, student engagement, less hall wandering as kids seek snacks from wherever source they can find it. It would also improve our working conditions. It would be less free reduced lunch paperwork on my end, right? It would be less bureaucracy. It would be so I think we have some of our skills as social workers are the exact skills that you need to be an organizer. Um, and on a very like practical day-to-day level as a union rep, I have certain advantages that my teacher colleagues don't, right? I have access to every teacher's schedule, right? I know when teachers are free and when they're not. I have again, let's go back to the hypothetical circumstance where federal agents are harassing staff and students at school, right? Like a teacher cannot leave their room in certain times, but I have that flexibility, right? To go to the parking lot at this time or something like that. I am much more likely to have a read on administration. I work with them more closely than the teachers and might know better what is feasible and what isn't in advocacy in the building. I might have access to budget data or district numbers that other staff don't have. Um, I have access to our enrollment numbers, our disparities around homelessness, right? These are all things that can help plan a grassroots campaign that my teacher colleagues don't have access to. So I think we think about your role's unique access. And to that point, I think somebody also asked a question about kind of a separate bargaining unit or not for social workers as compared to teachers. And I can't speak to have personally experienced a dynamic where it's a separate bargaining unit, but I think it might be tempting because we have unique needs that teachers don't have. But I think there is always strength in numbers. For example, in our Madison Teachers Inc. represents not just our teachers and student services staff, but also our substitutes and our education assistants or special education assistants, behavior education assistants, right? When our union rep team meets with our principal, we have a security staff person and a special education assistant rep in those conversations. It provides all of us more leverage to be able to share our interests, recognize where there's shared interests, and also not unintentionally put each other against each other, right? Sometimes teachers may get frustrated at security for not responding fast enough. And then security, because we're in the same union, can share, well, that's because we don't have the staffing. If we have a conflict in the athletics wing, there's just no one to get to here, right? So what we should be advocating for is not to put more pressure on security staff, but to increase the allocation of security staff, right? Redirecting this to, again, recognize the systemic factors instead of blaming the individual. So I think there is strength. Or Milwaukee, something I really admire about the Milwaukee Teachers Union is that they cover their food service employees as they're in the same local, which means that students have driven a campaign in Milwaukee for improved school meals. And as an educator union, MTEA, Milwaukee's teacher union, has not only supported that effort, but been able to incorporate demands around improving the food service worker conditions, right? You're not going to have better school meals for kids until you have food service employees who have the time and pay to match the work needed to improve school meals.
Well, thank you. And as we're out of time, but I want to give just a couple minutes for each of you to be able to comment on something that you've been really needing to, or a question. I know for our panelists, if you see a question that you want to type an answer to, it'll just go to that person. It's something it's not broadcast out there. So if that's something that for you also. So each of you just a burning statement or conclusion you'd like to say, and then I'll give the quick thing at the end about the next parts of it. But anybody want to make a closing? Andrew?
I'll just jump in and say
Huh?
that I like, what we've talked about today, and that really unions are we talk about that social justice organizing. Like I believe that public schools should be the epicenter of communities, right? And that everybody's a lifelong learner, and we should be supporting whether access to care, whether medical or dental or behavioral health care. That we should be educating the whole child, right? And these things speak to community needs. Food insecurity, clothing insecurity. We're in a position to build capacity and have power. And I think that the stronger we are as an organization, and there's pros and cons to having separate bargaining units, but in terms of capacity, we can do more when we are united together.
Well, and thank you for joining us and giving us perspective to show that union things, it can be different across states, but the bottom line is very, very similar in and that it can be handled in all kinds of communities. Because I know sometimes people feel like it has to be urban, or it has to be big, or it's like, no, I mean, I think there's many, many ways that they can be. Alma, would you like to give any closing statement?
Yeah, I would like to thank all of the panelists. I've learned a lot from you, and I'm very, very grateful to be able to share this space with you.
Thank you very much. I guess Maggie, anything else, or Leland at the end here? I know there's so much we could cover. Like we had said, this is really a touchstone for people to think about being active in the unions, how unions can be effective, how school social workers can be very effective leaders in our unions. And anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank you, Jenny. I want to thank everyone for coming and joining this very important conversation. It's really exciting to see, 170 people are tuning in, and um, you know, unions are so important to me personally, and I'm glad people are joining the conversation and wanting to learn more.
Thanks. And anything, Leland, you wanted to add?
We're out of time, so I'll just say union slogan, go fight, win.
All right, thank you. And for any of you listening to the session, either now or later on, feel free to shoot an email to me if you have questions about union information. I'll be glad to try to find the right people for you to connect to. And I think the more you can, or you contact with your union in your schools, if you don't have one, the state level, whatever state that you're in, can also give you information about how else you can be supported. So in closing, I would like to thank all of you for all of your information and great perspectives. It's really been wonderful, and sharing your time and expertise and all your valuable information, and everyone that's in attendance and at our session today. And for the attendees to please watch for an email with a link to complete an evaluation on today's presentation. Watch for a separate email regarding CEUs for those of you that requested them when you registered. And note that then this is the conclusion for the morning session, but to go to the website for the conference for information on the sessions that will be the breakout in this afternoon that will begin at 12 p.m. Central Time on Zoom. And our closing plenary, wonderful speaker, I hope you can all join. It's at 2 o'clock on Central Time on YouTube. All that information is on the website. And thank you again for everyone. And hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation in some other manner and other ways. Thank you.